Thanks for joining us in This Week in Turkey. I am Murat, Türsan. Tonight, the Lira has one of its worst weeks yet, and the opposition continues to call for early elections. Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi visits President Erdogan, and Israeli couple are freed, and religious conservative sects grow on social media. Our guests tonight are Doctor of Econometrics Harun Öztürkler and author and PhD Kaya Genç. On to our main story, which seems like it's on repeat because frankly, it very much is. The Lira lost 15% of its total value against the dollar this week alone, as President Erdogan declares yet another economic war of independence. Declaring economic wars of independence is President's bread and butter, as it's not the first time he's done it. Declaring an economic war of independence is, of course, a play on the Turkish war of independence that built this country. The President insists that there are unseen and shadowy foreign powers intent on collapsing the Lira, and the fact that the Lira seems to lose value every time he lowers the interest rates are merely coincidental. As Lira fell, panic took hold as consumers lined up to buy goods, were turned away, or stood in long lines. We'll have Medyascope regular Harun Öztürkler for analysis, but let's go to that story first.
The Lira has lost 15% of its total value this week, and the Turkish currency crisis continues with no end in sight. The dollar started out hovering around 11 to 1 on Monday, but was later met with meteoric rise on Tuesday after President Erdogan's press release. Wednesday saw the dollar at its highest point ever, trading at 13.10, later stabilizing and closing at 12 to 1 on Thursday. What triggered the sharp rise this time was President Erdogan's statement on Tuesday declaring economic war of independence. This is not the first time the president has used this term. The president has declared a war of independence 3 times in the last 3 years against ambiguous supposed foreign powers that seek to devalue the lira. As the markets experienced turmoil, it hit customers and businesses hard. On Tuesday, Apple temporarily suspended sales in Turkey due to the wildly fluctuating currency. Many items on Apple's web store were temporarily unavailable for purchase, and customers at physical stores were being turned away. At the same time, there was pandemonium at gas stations as drivers were lined up to top up before the gas prices skyrocketed.
I'm a regular customer here. I've been waiting in line to get gas for about 40 minutes. I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what's going to happen. I came here because I need gas. I've been waiting for 40 minutes. I don't really know where the country is going. May God help us.
Oradan buraya girinceye kadar hiçbir benzinlik benzin vermedi. Emniyeti aradım, emniyet birimlerini aradım.
No gas station sold gas. I called the police. They told me to come here. Thank God I can buy gas here, so I can go home. May God help us.
Joining me now, Professor of Econometrics, Dr. Harun Öztürkler. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's our absolute pleasure. Now, Doctor, as we are now painfully aware that reducing interest rates result in the devaluation of the lira, but President Erdogan appears intent on reducing interest rates still. Now, President Erdogan says that he is targeting 5% lending rate, and despite the lira taking continuous hits, he insists that he knows what he's doing. Yet every time the president seems to comment on the economy, we seem to be plunged into further turmoil. Can you speculate on what is going on right now?
Mr. Türsan, to be honest, Mr. President said that they know what they are doing, but the problem is that we economists we do not know what they are doing. In economics, specifically in econometrics, the directions of the relationship between economic variables are certain, and they are based on empirical observations of tens of, many decades of empirical observations. And here, in this case, the relationship between, or causal relationship between interest rate and inflation is again certain, and it is from inflation towards interest rate. What basically they are offering is that they are going to lower interest rate, and then as a result, currency Turkish lira will depreciate, and then that will lead to lower prices for Turkish exported goods and services, and then the imported goods are going to be expensive, so that we are going to have current account surplus once we have reserve foreign exchange reserves surplus, then it will lead to, again, this time value Turkish lira, and then inflation will go down. But we could have a reverse case. I took a simple note here. We can try to, Mr. Türsan, lower inflation today through the tools of the central bank, for example, higher interest rates, and there are other tools as well. And then that would lead to low inflation, would lead to competitive domestic goods through lower prices of the domestic goods, which would increase export. And then since your domestic goods are cheaper, then that would lead to lower import, so that higher export, lower import would lead to, again, current account surplus. But this time, through this model, you are both having low inflation and high current account, or at least you do not have current account deficit. So, but now the model that they are trying to do, it's also criticized whether it is model or not, because any model, any economic model should define at least what kind of variables it includes, and then the theoretical basis of those relationships. But at the end, the reverse model that I have just offered is working much better than what they are trying to do.
I see. So this particular model, if we can call that indeed, is, well, it's not working as expected. Let's just keep it that way. And Doctor, a follow-up question. For the last 7 or 8 years, at least in my estimation, we seem to be either coming out of an economic crisis or going into an economic crisis.
Yeah.
Consumer trust index is at an all-time low. The Lira is at an all-time low. At this point, honestly, is there any way we can get out of this dead spin? What would your recommendation be?
Okay. Well, there are basically two, for the Turkish economy at least, two things that we have to improve so that we can have a sustained economic growth. One is consumption, Mr. Türsan. And as you just said, the consumer confidence is very, very low. Historically low. Consumer confidence index has been prepared, as far as I remember, since 2004, and that is the lowest level. Specifically, consumers' expectations for their income levels, for the economy's future stance, it is the lowest. And then another important point is that consumers are not planning to make any purchases, consumer goods purchases for the next 3 months. So one is that we have to have a strong consumption expenditure, because consumption expenditure is still one of the major part of the total demand, aggregate demand in the Turkish economy. Second one is investment. Export. For the Turkish case, Mr. Türsan, of course, it is affected by the value of the Turkish lira, but it is also determined by the income levels, economic situation of your exporting partners. But consumer expenditures and investment expenditures, physical investment expenditures, are to some certain extent at least are under our control, policy control, at least what I'm trying to say. So that second part is investment. We have to have strong investment so that Turkish economy can go, and then at least we can stop this fluctuation in the GDP, economic activity level that you are referring to. For the investment part, for the consumption part, of course, you have to have strong income for the consumers. For the investment part, investors, Mr. Türsan, of course, are caring about the interest rate, the cost of the investment, but more important thing for the investor is to be able to see the future. So this uncertainty must go away so that we can have investment. And since since 1936, Keynes published his book, General Theory. We know that the interest rate elasticity of the investment is low. What investors are looking for also, whether there is going to be enough demand for the goods and services they are producing, so that we must create such an economic case, economic area situation, so that consumer expenditures can go on, and then the Turkish investment can go on. Turkish economy can have a sustained economic growth rate.
I see. And one I don't suppose would be mistaken when we assume that it is rather difficult to have investment and consumer confidence in the market while the lira wildly fluctuates and especially loses 15% of its value in 1 week alone, which I believe is unprecedented. Now, I want to end on one final note, Doctor. There are those who assert the theory that this is all being done intentionally in order to reduce the cost of manufacturing because it will in turn reduce the cost of labor if you reduce, of course, the price of the currency. How realistic is this? Now, there are those who purport that the global manufacturing and supply chains are shifting away from China, and Turkey aims to be Europe's China in the future. How realistic is this, considering that we virtually import almost all our hydrocarbon energy, and it is, of course, priced on the market value?
Mr. Türsan, Turkey is energy dependent for about 75%, and also we are importing most of our basic commodities, specifically intermediate goods and the capital goods. Unfortunately, in Turkey, there are about 3,200,000 firms, and about 94.5% of those firms are micro or small firms. They are not institutionalized firms, and the technology level that they are using is incredibly low, Mr. Türsan. The high technology share of the Turkish export is about 2%. So with this technological background, it is, I would hope that Turkey is going to be at least, part of this, even if we do not become China of the Europe, but at least if we can grab a good share in terms of providing intermediate goods, capital goods, and of course the final goods for the European market. But to do so, we will need to improve this technological basis of our firms, so that we can produce high technology embedded again intermediate goods and then the capital goods. Otherwise, this is going to be wishful thinking, unfortunately.
Wishful thinking, I would say so indeed. That's Dr. Harun Öztürk. Doctor, thank you for being able to join us today, and we'd love to have you back on in the future.
Hopefully. Thank you for having me again.
And as the lira falls, far be it from the opposition to remain quiet. The opposition had been asking for early elections going back a few years now. However, the opposition is highly confident that AKP's days are numbered. And looking at the polls, they do indeed have a good reason to be confident. Three major opposition parties, CHP, E-Party, and HDP, released press statements on Wednesday scolding AKP and Erdogan for recent economic downturn.
Speaking at the group meeting of her party, İYİ chairman Meral Akşener criticized the government's economic policy over the increase in the exchange rate. Akşener stated, "Mr. Erdogan speaks, the dollar rises. Mr. Erdogan speaks, the dollar rises. As Mr. Erdogan speaks, our nation gets poorer. No matter what you say, no matter what lies you make up, no matter what tales you tell, the cat is out of the bag, it's the plain truth." While Akşener scolded Erdogan, she urged her party members to also remain calm and not spill out into the streets. "There will be provocations on this road ahead, and we will be calm. There will be those who will want to take to the streets, those who want to divide the nation and set us against each other. We will not allow it, and when the inevitable day comes, we will bury these dirty tricks in that ballot box whether they want it or not.
Değerli basın mensupları.
CHP Chair Kılıçdaroğlu held a press conference after the extraordinary Central Executive Board meeting of his party. Kılıçdaroğlu reiterated his call for early elections, stating, "Bring the ballot box, brother, bring the ballot box. In democracies, you cannot escape the people. You are afraid, you are running away. I will do whatever it takes to force you and your party to an early election. I'm going to force you for the sake of orphans, for the unemployed, for all of the people." Kılıçdaroğlu also remarked on President Erdogan's economic policies. "You are selling the country down the road. We are standing up to this. What he does is complete insanity. Nonsense. Nonsense. He is planning on devaluing the assets of the entire country, having foreign buyers visit him and selling it off to them. You've sold off everything. This country has honor, it has a currency, and you have managed to sell everything."
Çok değerli halkımız,
HDP co-chair Mithat Sancar also made a statement after the party's Central Executive Board meeting and called to the opposition. "Let's immediately prepare a joint election bill and submit it to the parliament. If the president does not decide on early elections and does not resign, the parliament should step in. A major crisis coordination board should be established where trade unions, labor, and professional organizations, all opposition parties come together and elect representatives. The strongman regime and the elements that feed it are not this country's inescapable fate."
In related news, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, visited President Erdogan on Wednesday. The prince, who was previously not on speaking terms with the president due to the accusations of supporting the July 15 coup attempt that sought to overthrow president, has received a typical warm presidential welcome on a cold Ankara day. The two nations have been battling for supremacy in the Middle East region for a decade through proxy wars and propaganda. It now appears that the dust is settling, but it's hard to say who won. Regardless, the president didn't walk away from the meeting empty-handed, as among other things, he did secure a $10 billion investment from the Emiratis.
Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan visited Turkey on Wednesday. The visit is the first in a decade as the two nations have battled for regional dominance and proxy wars in the Middle East. President Erdogan is now attempting to de-escalate tensions with the UAE and its allies. The Crown Prince received a warm welcome several months after his first in a decade phone call with President Erdogan. According to the press release by the Presidential Palace, the two heads of state discussed bilateral relations and regional issues. However, the release was sparse on details. Emirates news agency, the UAE's state news agency, reported that the two leaders reviewed the prospects of reinforcing the relations between the two nations in a way that serves their common interests and their two peoples. Despite the two countries' troubled relations in the past, the meeting between the two played host to the signing of multiple deals. During the prince's visit, the two nations signed a memorandum of understanding on the exchange of financial information in an effort to prevent money laundering, cooperation on Abu Dhabi's ports and Turkey's wealth funds, the UAE's wealth funds, MOUs signed between the stock exchange of both countries, the central banks of both countries, and the allocation of a $10 billion fund from the UAE to be invested in Turkey. Crown Prince Al Nahyan later posted on Twitter, "We had fruitful discussion focusing on ways to strengthen relations between our countries. I look forward to exploring new cooperation opportunities to benefit our two nations and advance our mutual development goals."
In domestic news, the president made headlines again last week, but not intentionally. An Israeli couple visiting Turkey on vacation were arrested after photographing the president's private residence in Istanbul's Üsküdar district from an observation tower. The couple were then later charged with espionage and held in Turkey, only to be released last week after talks between Israel and Turkey. Mordi and Natalie Oknen, who were in Istanbul for the first time, paid a visit to the Çamlıca Tower, a radio, TV, and observation tower in Istanbul that I'm told has the best sights in the city. The couple were arrested after allegedly staff member overheard them talking about taking pictures of the president's home, which sounds like a high-risk, low-reward spy mission because it only took me 5 minutes to pull it up. Regardless, the couple is back in Israel safe and sound with yet another international crisis averted for now.
Israeli couple Modi and Natalie Oknin were released from custody last week after having been arrested for photographing President Erdogan's private residence from the Çamlıca TV tower in Istanbul's Üsküdar district. The couple landed back in Israel last Thursday morning on a charter flight. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said in a statement, after joint initiatives against Turkey, the Oknins were released and are now returning to Israel. We thank the President and the government of Turkey for their cooperation and welcome the Oknins back home. The couple was initially detained as the authorities claimed that the Israeli couple took a photo of Erdogan's house from the Çamlıca TV tower, a transmitter and observation tower some 500 yards from the president's residence. The tower's construction was ordered by the president himself and is frequented by tourists. A staff member at the tower allegedly overheard the couple talking about the residence and reported them to the police. Upon the couple's arrest, the police had advised that the couple be deported and notified the Israeli authorities of the matter. Accompanied by a Turkish national identified only as IA, the couple was later transferred to court where their statements were taken. On November 12th, the couple was later charged with conducting political and military espionage. On Tuesday, November 16th, Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu had expressed concerns that this problem would take a long time to resolve and accused the couple of espionage.
My next guest is Dr. Kaya Genç, author of such books such as Lion and the Nightingale, A Journey Through Modern Turkey, and Under the Shadow, Rage and Revolution in Modern Turkey. But all his works are highly recommended. But tonight we'll be talking about a February article published in restofworld.org regarding a rise of Islamic Tariqas on social media. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's our absolute pleasure. Now, I thought that your article was deeply interesting, and we'll put a link down in the description for folks at home who do want to do a deep dive on the subject. Now, you write about rise of online tariqas in Turkey, particularly during the pandemic, and how that relates to the current ruling government. Could you, at first, give us a little brief of your article for the folks at home?
Well, it's about how Islamic clerics engage with the internet, how they engage with social media, and how they implement and instrumentalize it for their own purposes. I was fascinated by the subject because I've been I have never been a fan of these clerics. I didn't watch them on YouTube. I didn't understand what people said about them, but I've heard so much about them. Lots of my secular friends were giving me some little excerpts from these speeches, and they were asking me to follow these clerics because they were hilarious. They were saying these incredible things. They have this incredible charisma, and to be part of Turkey's national conversation, you have to follow them, or you'll be left out. Let's say in the US, people watch The Daily Show, Tonight Show. People watch these incredible comedians talking about what's going on in Turkey. And politics is, of course, very much involved in these shows. And in Turkey, you have to watch these programs to understand the national conversation about Turkey. But of course, it's a very problematic field because, as we know, reading Rushan Çakır's books, for example, how Turkish politics is deeply ingrained in these religious groups, and how their politics, how their struggles, how their power imbalances play out in Turkish national politics. So I expected it to be a kind of minefield. When I approached them, I thought that they would be very skeptical. This secular Turkish guy approaching them to report their activities for a technology magazine, because Rest of World is a Silicon Valley-based technology magazine. And so instead, they were very open. I was very surprised to see that people I contacted from the Ismaila Cemaati, for example. They were very open, very young, tech-savvy people who wanted to talk about the technology and how they used it to spread God's message. And then the more I spoke with these people, the more I understood that they're really desperate to get their voice, to get their message be heard. And they want to spread that message. And I also saw that this is a very unregulated field. You know, if you open the pro-government stations, the pro-government networks, they're very strictly regulated. But on these YouTube channels, these clerics have to riff for many hours. You open a YouTube video and it goes on for the length of an Andrei Tarkovsky film. For 3 hours, this cleric is there talking about the Hadith, talking about the Quran, talking about some religious stories, but then going back to Turkish politics, going back to the latest scandal, to the latest moral debate. And I really admired their, let's say, their energy in the way they delivered those speeches. And, you know, they're unscripted. They have to be there. They have to, as the British say, think on their feet. And they're really very good at that. And I started listening to those sermons as podcasts. So when I was going out running, I would listen to Cübbeli Ahmet Hoca. I refer to him as Ahmet in Kazakhs. And then I would also listen to more radical clerics, you know, the kind of more radical Sunni clerics. And I realized why people are listening to them so intently, because these clerics really have a way of thinking. And after a while, you devote so much of your time to them, you start to see things in a way similar to their way. So there are many, of course, moral conundrums that they're dealing with here. You know, it can be about masturbation. Should Muslim men masturbate? Or it can be about politics. You know, should we be publicly open about our political preferences? But there are many conundrums that they're dealing with here. And there's an immense interest in these conundrums. So one of them, for example, one of the videos pondered the question, should we use internet banking? Should we use these apps on our smartphones? Or, you know, is it against Islam? So there are these clips, some 10 minutes long, some longer, that deal with these problems. And Ismaila is very good at that. They have a huge operation. They have different clerics. So it's not just Cübbeli Ahmet Hoca, but also other much younger clerics answering these Islamic questions to a growing audience. So they're very interested in curating these YouTube channels that they have. And they've even introduced a membership scheme. So if you pay to Ismaila Cemaati, they give you earlier access to their content. And so they've been very creative in this endeavor. But also, of course, the way they monetize this whole operation, of course, raises eyebrows. And, you know, it's a bit scary too, because so much money can be made from this. You know, for example, people pay in the US, for example, for Headspace. You know, Headspace has created this huge community around its product. It started with one expert, and now there are different experts giving meditations on this, but then it evolved into a community. But with Ismaila or Iskandar Pasha or Menzil or, you know, many other Jamaats in Turkey, they already have a Jamaat. You know, they don't have to start from scratch. they already have a Jamaat, but during COVID, this Jamaat could not congregate in their shrines. So YouTube was a good way to replace that. But as time goes by, it seems like YouTube may not be a temporary solution for these Islamic groups, but it may be here to stay because it opens so many new avenues to these Islamic groups. You know, they can debate the Madrid hand in the chat box in YouTube, for example. So the community can find ways of interacting with each other that maybe they didn't otherwise had when they congregated at their own spaces. So some of these clerics, like Alparslan Kuytul, for example, who was very anti-government, got into trouble because of these sermons. But others, like Cübbeli Ahmet Hoca, you can also see him on more mainstream TV channels in Turkey. So my interest started with these Turkish clerics, but then I found out that this trend is also going on in Germany, in the US. So I found different YouTube clerics in places like Cologne, in Germany, and in New York State, and found that there are other Naqshbandi groups who want to spread the Sufi message using YouTube, because they found out that most of the new recruits to their sects come via YouTube and their social media channels. So then you have this huge geography of different clerics. They're like different cities on a map. And some of them stream videos that are highly produced, and some pale in comparison. So then you start to see that this plays a big role, actually, because it's part of a bigger interest in religion. Like, how meticulous can this preacher be in producing his videos, and how meticulous can his group be in producing these videos? So they're in competition. So just because there are so many clerics, you can see that they're also in big competition to produce more popular religious videos.
I see. Now, to interject myself here, I am deeply familiar with the phenomenon that you mentioned, that during lockdowns, people got a sense of community from a religious organization. And I was going to ask you if this was a temporary phenomenon or if it was here to stay. I mean, I myself have seen many folks who were not previously very religious engage in online sermons, online churches, etc. But we're pressed for time. So I do want to ask you one final question. I think what people are really wondering is, in Turkey, we have a rough history when it comes to Tariqas. At times, Tariqas have been allied with the ruling government, and at times they have been odds with the ruling government. Famously, Fethullah Gül is wanted in Turkey. As you mentioned, Alparslan Kuytul, another religious leader, served time in prison because he simply did not see eye to eye with the government. And the government does tend to crack down on these Tariqas. Now, do you think that the rise of these online Tariqas could usher yet another battle for supremacy between clerics and the government? Or perhaps with the elections coming up, of course, do you think we could see the ruling party leverage this voter bloc to their own gain, to carterize them? I understand that this would be speculation, but please go.
Yes, I mean, I was rereading Rushan Chakra's book on Erdogan, and I noticed that, and you can't help but notice that these sects, Iskandera and Ismaila and Iskandar Pasha, these sects are very powerful. You know, they're not like 15 very powerful sects in Istanbul. There are 2 very powerful sects in Istanbul, or there's Menzil in Anatolia. So they're not like hundreds of different religious groups that the government has to control. They just have to control the few that really matter. and they're controlling them very successfully. They're allowing them to spread their message very freely. They're not cracking down on them. They say, okay, here is the YouTube, here's the stage. Just spread your message and let the people decide. And I think, that we see that the media has collapsed in the past 2 decades in Turkey. But these kind of religious avenues for thought have really flourished. And I think that rather than a power struggle between the government and these sects, I think we can see that there's a continuity. There is a continuity between the government's ideals and actions, and of course the interests of the government and the power and the influence of the government and these sects. And they're much more intertwined than we think, I believe. And we have to look more closely to these relationships because people really feel like themselves when they go and listen to these sermons. This is where they socialize. And I think the secular people in Turkey don't really understand this connection. It's a very powerful connection. And I urge people to watch these sermons to understand their appeal. And of course, the power that you mentioned, the political power they have. I don't want to speculate about the next elections, but I think that we have to see, for example, how the debate about interest rates resonates on these YouTube channels. I stopped watching them after I wrote my piece, but I'm really curious. How does the government's message on fiscal policy and its new directions in economy reverberate on these platforms, whether they wholeheartedly support it or whether they have reservations or whether they want something even more radical in terms of interest rates. These are things we have to look into.
Absolutely. And with that, Kaya Genç, thank you for your assessment, and it was a pleasure to have you on tonight, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And with that said, that's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat Türsan, and thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.